All right, welcome to another edition of New Wine Uncorked. And as always, I'm stoked to be joined by Phil and by Tony. Last week we were talking about authenticity in the church. And you know what? This week we find ourselves in the same situation with the church, with Christian universities, Christian schools, K through 12, trying to figure out what's going on in light of COVID-19. But also, there's still this social unrest going because of the politics with the presidential campaign coming up. And so these are conversations, this is a dialogue that needs to continue to happen because the things that are surrounding the dialogue continue to happen, whether it's the elections in November, which are crucial, which every year that we vote for the president is crucial. So hear this from me. Every 4 years, every person who's 18 and older should be voting regardless of what you think the importance of your vote is, right? Because this is what it means to be a participant. Created in the image of a relational God means that we participate with one another. And so, in our continued attempts to participate in the lives of each other, this week we're continuing on that train of, well, what is authenticity when it comes to Christianity? And how then does consumerism, because we live in a very capitalistic, which is good in the sense of capitalism, allows for a lot of the things that we have to today. So, none of us are going to completely demonize a capitalistic system because it's what we live in, and yet we want to still be critical, especially when the church participates in this system. And so this week we're going to be talking about the idea of consumerism, the Homo consumus. We are Homo sapiens, and yet we have been raised up in a culture where consuming is who we are. And consumption is a good thing, especially in light of the Eucharist. The church is called to consume the bread, the body, and the blood of Jesus Christ. So, in light of COVID-19, in light of these mandates to mask, not to mask, to meet social distance, how is it that consumerism is affecting the church or continues to affect the church? So, Phil, you talked last week about how this church that you're helping to get going and things. How is it that you find having to push against or use the consumeristic mentality of today's churchgoer?
Absolutely. There's a couple of things that I think that kind of goes into the fray in a practical sense, just dealing with consumerism and the church. And part of it, I mean, I'm going to take kind of a quote, Ta-Nehisi quote idea, Ta-Nehisi Coates idea, and use it here, where he talks about race. He talks about America doesn't know how to live in a society without racism. We don't know how to function another way. And so it makes kind of all the things happening now, it makes it kind of ripe for questions, criticism, and the like, because we're all still trying to figure this out. We have good ideas and what on the back end would be better, but we don't know how to necessarily get there or even truly live it out. So I'm wondering the same kind of thing when it comes in relationship to the church and consumerism, is the fact that we live in a society where capitalism, consumerism is bound to everything that we do. So how can we not do that in the church? We know that we want people to come to our church. So we imagine we make it marketable. We make it so we have the best worship, best preacher, best childcare system, and then we advertise those kind of things, and hopefully that attracts people. And no matter what church you go to, those are going to be the things that folks are going to focus on. Um, but the point of having real conversation, walking with people through difficult times, and all those kind of ministry things that we don't necessarily aren't on the front line, aren't the thing that we're going to market off of, because those aren't the things that are popular. Those aren't things that are going to be attract people. So so it's almost just like how do we actually do it? How do we actually live in a church that says we're going to be contrary to culture, and we're going to stand out and be so very different that people then grab a Jew, grab a churchgoer by their clothes and say, I want to go worship with you because I see the Lord working there. So those are the questions that I wrestle with when I consider this. But yeah, it just begins with living in the society and thinking, okay, how can we be different? And not really having an answer for that because we really don't know another way.
Yeah, I think, and this comes with the discussion that we had last week with the worship leader, and we were talking about this earlier. Phil, you and I got a chance to discuss and interview two pastors, Pastor Lisa and Pastor Renee, about an event that was going on MLK, and that event was, in some sense, hijacked, you know, based on opportunistic mentality, and that comes from, I think, consumerism, because the greater the opportunity is to get what we want is very much of a consumerist mindset. The question is how do we combat that? Tony, you relate to youth, and then also with the leaders of your church, but how is it that today's culture, especially from, let's say, 25 and under, uh, has been brought up in consumerism, but sometimes they seem to push against it?
Yeah, I think um, in the same vein, it's like postmodernism is a reaction to modernity, but still a part of modernity. Um, the younger millennials and the Gen Zs who react against consumerism in either a response or rejection are still in some ways participating in consumerism. I think there's something to be said about we're able to reject, or we have the privilege or the luxury of rejecting consumerism because other people are trapped within the cycle of consumerism. I think it's, for the last 5 years, I've noticed it's really hip and trendy for, especially in Portland, to be conscious of your social footprint, to be buying ethical clothing and ethical food, like whatever ethical means. The target for ethics is always moving, but yeah, you want to be conscious that you don't buy slave labor and you're buying $90 jeans because it's some guy in a studio apartment, just sewing. But it's like, the implications of that is you being able to buy a $90 pair of jeans means something where you're not contributing to lower quality material, but the money is spread out more. So there are implications of that. And so I think when it comes to consumerism, it's such a complicated conversation. It's a large conversation. And so for younger millennials and Gen Zers, we're able to refrain, or from consumerism and not participate, but we're still contributing to that cycle in some ways.
Yeah, and in connection to what you just said, Tony, because I think that this kind of goes back to what the framework I brought up, where we see the benefits and the things that we want to turn away from, but because we don't really know another way, we're still kind of contributing to it. So you could bring up, a 25-year-old that limits their footprint, that they're conscious about climate, that they're conscious about the environment, all those kind of things, and then shop with companies, buy shoes and all those things that contribute to that, because the company said it'd be marketable to the 25-year-old if we demonstrate how much our footprint on the society, on the environment is reduced, and we put that on our shoes, and we don't do those kind of things, so the 25-year-old will buy it. And it's the same kind of thing. We're living into it because we don't necessarily know another way, because we're going to buy shoes. And if those shoes are $120, we'll buy the shoes. If their jeans are $90, we'll buy the jeans. So yeah, we're still contributing to it, just because the company is now saying, oh, marketing this way is the way to market to folks, so they'll buy on the back end. So.
And I think where I've been learning and trying to come to a better understanding is, it's great to have personal responsibility, but the problem isn't always on a personal level. And so when we look at global warming and climate change, it's not just the footprint of the individual. If anything, the individual footprint uh, is so small that we make no difference in altering our lives. This isn't to say we should strive to be more aware of our carbon footprint, but this is also to say there are corporations and systems and structures that perpetuate global geological unrest. And so I think in the same way, when we talk about the church, there is something to be said about the church's societal footprint, as we see with the unrest and the churches that are meeting against state regulations and state laws, because there is a communal, societal, cultural footprint that the church is making, and in some ways, this footprint is going to either turn people away or draw people in, for better or for worse. And so I think thinking about consumerism, it has to be, yes, at a personal level, an individual level, but the individual that's a part of the system and the larger structure.
Yeah.
And they'll,
Go on, Phil. No, yeah, I was just going to say that, radio music stars, you see this, and they've fought against this capitalistic mindset, but still playing within this system. You think of how Jay-Z has changed the way in which R&B and rap have done things because of his use of or pushing back against the consumeristic mindset of being controlled by the big corporations. Kanye West, wherever anyone falls with him, he definitely seeks to use the system in place, right? The band Radiohead, Tom York, the lead singer, said, it's not that we're trying to create a revolution, because how can you revolt against this, the market forces? They're just too powerful. But what we're trying to do with each song is refute it, meaning we were push back. Yes, you're going to use aspects of it, but you're pushing back in the midst of it, and so then they get this following. If you talk to any number of those folks, like Kanye West followers, Jay-Z followers, Radiohead followers, going even back to Elvis Presley, who pushed against this system, or any blues, jazz, John Coltrane, like you talk to their followers, they're loyal. They've got that loyalist following. So there still are those market characteristic and traits, because people who are loyal to companies, you see they'll never, they always drink Starbucks or they always drink Pete's, and they will have, like, it becomes these big debates on who's more ethical, Pete's or Starbucks or the local mom pop coffee place. And so with the church, then it's interesting. Does the church see herself as someone just simply trying to make a statement, or revolutionary, trying to push back? And you see it is playing out in the politics right now. The one side's calling the other side Marxist, and that side is then calling this other side, conspiratorial or anti-human almost, that they're not for the people because they're not progressively for the people. So we see this playing out politically as if, and they're both trying to commandeer the economic or the market forces. And I feel as though when the church, we told our kids this, and you both have dealt with youth ministry, you tell the kids, before you get into the decision of whether or not to have sex, to do drugs, to go out and do whatever thing your friends do, you have to make that decision prior to that, because if you're trying to make the decision in the moment, you're going to fail. I just don't know if the church has even thought about that. You cannot serve two masters, mammon or God, because we cannot do it. You will serve one, and deny the other. And I just don't know if the church has even thought through these tendencies, these consumeristic tendencies that each one of us has, and how it really does define us, whether it deals with racism. Because the reason why you wouldn't want to deal with racism or admit that there's been an issue over the last few years, 400 years, right, is the possibility of economic, this might hurt our, because buying the jeans from the local business person who is a black owner might not be as cheap as buying it on Amazon, but relationally it pays dividends, right? And yet it's inconvenient when it comes to finances. Again, meeting in person, trying to find every which way around the little mandates just so we can meet in person, because there's this belief that if you're in person, the money flows. How is it that the church, even deals with this, if we're not even asking these questions?
And I think part of it is will kind of mask the intentions under. So I mean, we all go to church and we know it's very difficult to take off the smiley face when you're at church. Everything seems to be the best. To wear your best clothes, best car to drive to church for Sunday. And 2 hours later, you're driving home, arguing with your wife in the car on the way back home. Right? And so, but then the whole notion of we're meeting to worship God, and we want this to be the reason why we're doing it. Not to mention that, yes, maybe the money flows more freely if we're meeting in person and those kind of things become more convenient, more easy. But it's under the shroud of we want to come together to worship Christ. We won't neglect meeting together, and even anything that we're pointing to, there is an affirmative step that we want to step towards, meaning we want to glorify God. We just don't necessarily know how to do it without feeding into the evils of our culture. We don't know how to be the best of us and still, glorifying God and still, doing things that are safe. In particular, right now, when people have what they conceive to be a clear enemy, where they see the protest movement, when they see the government, when they see all these kind of things as the clear enemy, then it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to let their words influence anything at all that I'm saying, rather than saying, hey, wait, let's make sure we're actually looking at this holistically and responding appropriately and seeing if there's more creative ways we can actually meet together and actually be the church. Because it may not be anything that involves meeting together in a building to worship. It may be that our worship looks like, where are all the homeless people sleeping if the shelters aren't bedding people right now? Where are they actually sleeping? Where are they getting fed? Are the places that usually would feed people, are those places still there doing their stuff? Do they need more resources? And all these kind of things. Not even just that, the services and such that have been slowed down because of COVID. Like, are those families getting the resources and such that they need in order to do that? Does everyone have good internet where they live? All these kind of questions. And these are all things that the church could be doing, and we could be meeting together to meet those needs rather than meeting together for a 2-hour mask session per se.
Yeah, I think in terms of like society and culture, what we see in our consumer society is that ethical actions or ethics and morality is actually something consumable. It's marketable. And so that's the trap, is that doing the right thing is now a lifestyle brand. And so to what Matt was saying, like, I think with the church has found its niche, its marketability within society, and now it's trapped or held captive by those market forces. When we have to rely on the government for our freedom, are we truly free? I mean, with the question, like, are we serving two masters? If we're getting our freedom from the government and our religious liberty from the government, are we receiving the freedom from God? Are we receiving God's freedom? And this, I think I need to be careful in saying that too. This isn't to say I'm not grateful for the religious liberty we have as Christians in the United States, but it's also to say I think Christians have used their religious liberty to detriment of other people. When we look to the founding of this nation, like when the Puritans came, who did they displace in the name of their religious freedom? The Salem witch trials, who was executed in the name of religious freedom? And so, yeah, I this isn't to say I'm not grateful and in debt to the freedom I have to express my faith. It's also to say I don't believe I'm persecuted as a Christian. I think I'm the furthest thing. If anything, it's more dangerous to be a Christian in the United States than anywhere else in the world, not because of persecution, but because of complicity and comfortability. Because we are a servant that hides the talents and just sits on it. Because we are the the servants that puts the light under a shade. We are so comfortable, and so that, if anything, is more deadly and anemic to our faith.
Yeah, I'm curious to know if the Bethel, and because they're just, I mean, since I'm in California right now, they're just right up the street from me, the Redding folks. I'd be curious to hear, so anyone watching, if they know Sean, feel free to send an extension, an invitation. I'll even email them because I'm curious to know the mentality because of a group coming into Portland who is an outsider. They're not Portlanders, displacing a prayer group, a group that had been meeting specifically and intentionally for prayer on MLK to do exactly what the church is called to do to combat these evils of society, whether or not people believe that racism is systemic or not. The fact is that this group was coming together for prayer. Before Jesus went to the cross, his form of worship was prayer. And so for someone like Sean to think that it's okay to step into a city that's not his own, you know, and to bring that to then worship and displace a group of folks that were trying to go on behalf, right? What is the gospel? What is real religion? To take care of the orphans and the widows. Jesus says, in Luke 11, the parable of the Good Samaritan, it's the one who cares for the other, the one who's down on the ground, the least of these, Matthew 25. And it seems like the consumeristic mentality. And you know what? You have to call it out, I think, with these supposed leaders. I put it in quotation marks because I feel like it's the example of what is not leadership. Just because you have people following you doesn't mean that you're a leader. And so to step into a town not in cooperation or participation with the leaders of that town and call yourself a worship leader, to me, how can that not be at least a dialogue of, is that righteous? And and this is the trend, and this is where I would ask any one of my white brothers and sisters who are part of the church, how can you not see what is the continual movement of the white majority leadership coming into these areas and commandeering what's already been done, as opposed to, in humility, Sean coming up into Portland and saying, oh my gosh, you guys got this movement going already. How is it that we can come and support you? You know, consumeristic mentality doesn't do that. And so again, it infiltrates the core of the church. And I think so many people have been almost beaten down to say, you don't criticize because, oh, look at the log in your own eye, before you say anything. But that's not what the aspect of judgment is all about. It's righteous judgment, but must be done in love. Well, how is it not loving to confront someone and say, hey, what are the motivations? Phil, you were talking about that. The motivations are there. What is the motivation in doing this? And I would love to sit down with someone like Sean and say, hey, dude, give me the biblical precepts. Fine, sovereignty of God. Tony, you were talking during one of our last episodes about this breathing in and breathing out aspect. This mentality, the spiritual cleansing. Awesome. Teach us this. Instead, I feel like there's not the dialogue first. There's just this mass movement of people so that you just overwhelm. It's like what a bully does. They're loud, they're obnoxious, but usually anyone who's confronted a bully knows that when you stand up to them and you get in their face, 9 times out of 10, that bully cowers because they don't like confrontation. Consumerism understands that mass movement is harder to stop, rather than intentional dialogue, because dialogue people see as not doing anything, and yet because of the lack of the dialogue, look at all these people getting consumed in this movement of this worship movement. Is it worship when you're going out and possibly allowing people to be infected? If there was a colony of lepers, that we were praying over, most Christians I think would be like, oh, you think of back in the 80s. Talk to anyone who grew up in the 80s in San Francisco in the AIDS epidemic. What did they talk about? Anyone with AIDS was infectious. You wanted to stay away from them. That's kind of the mentality that we have now, is that anyone who doesn't believe in the sovereignty of God, they're infectious. Oh my gosh, stay away from them. COVID-19 is nothing. It's like, okay, so again, the consumeristic mentality says whatever's best for me, I will deny any kind of facts that you're putting to me because they go up against our ability to get what we want, you know. Where are the people standing up against that, you know? And there were some leaders, you mentioned that they put out a thing with Facebook, not judging in the sense of negative, but hey, asking the questions like, dude, look, think about what you're doing, you know, before you come into this city and claim you're doing this for God. When you're stepping on, that's not the way Jesus was, you know. So consumerism makes us think that as long as it feels good, you know, and we can slap Jesus or, you know, my buddy Jesus onto it, then it's religious, then it's okay. And the market forces and the marketing and the exploitation that we're doing doesn't matter, you know. It's almost as if we say, well, this is a lesser of two evils, you know, the way in which we're exploiting the system. But look at the mass numbers that we're getting, must mean that we're doing a good job. Think about any rally with Trump. It doesn't matter about content. It doesn't matter about the security. It's always what? About numbers.
I think, and to contextualize for our listeners, like for us doing these new wine uncorked conversations, the goal and I think the heart behind it is, man, we believe in the church. We want the church to be faithful to her witness and to her calling. But the question now in our cultural assessment and critique is, man, what's the wine that the church is offering? What's the content and the substance? What's the flavor that we're offering? Are we offering something that's pleasant and uplifting, or are we offering hand sanitizer like with red food coloring? Like, and I think that's the danger. And so yes, we may be coming off like critical of the church, but that's because we're a part of the church and we want the church to be faithful. And we have to call the church to account for her witness. And I think it's also to say, man, it's not to be conspiratorial, but when you see people who claim to be followers of Jesus and they say, I'm not going to wear a mask, I'm not going to follow social distancing because I believe God is much bigger and stronger than COVID and he's going to heal me. I would bet quite a bit that they're also the same people that are strong Second Amendment and they have more than one gun in their house. And when you ask them why do they have so many firearms, they would say, because I have to protect my religious liberty and my family. And so for me, for the sake of consistency, the question is, if you believe that God is so big and he's so powerful that he can protect you against an airborne disease, but he's not big enough to protect your religious liberty, where's the inconsistency? Is the inconsistency found in God, or is the inconsistency found in your belief? This isn't to attack anybody. I very much would just like a consistent conversation.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tony. Definitely, I was thinking, yeah, absolutely. I was thinking the same thing. And there's a couple of things I want to say here. First, I don't know, was it Sean that came from California to come to Portland, do the concert? I don't know just anything about his heart and how he uses his gifts and anything like that. I imagine being gifted, being popular, he was invited to come to Portland to come do this. And I think that kind of underscores one thing that has happened within the church, that's continued to happen for as long as we can remember, is that there's definitely several lines within the church, several different Christian communities that live even in a town like Portland, where there's just so many different Christian groups that aren't believing, seemingly not even believing the same gospel. Just as we kind of play this out, there's ones that will say that would want, a concert like that to be that's the statement of Christ's sovereignty over our city and his protection over our city and proclaiming the gospel in that way. There's other voices that would say, hey, praying for folks would be the way that we do this. And that just kind of just demonstrates the division that exists within the church. And just looking at that, again, just and kind of to the same spirit that you brought up just a moment ago in your response, just a moment ago, Tony, the fact that I think the three of us here, all of us that we represent, whether it be at churches or through New Wine as a whole, our heart hurts for the division that's in the church. And that just demonstrates how less powerful the church is because we're so divided and there's no definitive like answer as to what is the voice of Christ in the city, because we just end up going on so many different things and responding to so many different people. It just stands up to we're so divided that we can't be a witness to the world as to what Christ actually is. At the same token, um, going to a worship performance versus praying for people feeds right into what we're talking about, consumerism, because we're going to sit back and go to a concert and listen and participate because we're going to sing along, we're going to raise our hands, be emotional, all those kind of things. Those things are going to happen. Like I said, I imagine that the group is great, fine. At the same token, when you're praying on behalf and you're praying for this city and praying for people and you're holding hands with brothers and sisters in Christ that don't look like you, that don't have the same experience you have, and they're your brother and sister in Christ, and you have to hear their story and pray for them and pray with them, that changes the game. Where you can't just show up to something and disconnect, but you have to connect with your brother. And that is a part of the whole consumerism within the church, is that we're willing to do the thing that proclaims Christ, yeah. But if it allows me to sit in a chair and listen, and yeah, I'll raise my hands, I'll cry, all those kind of things. But if I have to look one of my brothers and sisters in Christ in the eye, hear their story, here's what's going on, hear how COVID has impacted their family, and then turn around and say, well, it's not real. Well, I can't say it's not real because it impacts my family. And now I'm crying and emotional for a whole different reason because I'm engaged with my brother and sister. So
Yeah, and I mean, to both your points, New Wine is bent on stepping into the heart of Jesus. I mean, part of our mission statement is New Wine exists to provide education and consultation for the sake of personal and community transformation centered in Christ. We have education, consultation, and transformation, but it's all centered in Christ. And so, to your point, Phil, there's this wrestling with the way forward. But if the dialogue gets away from that centered in Christness, then our actions inevitably are going to be rooted in unrighteousness. I mean, Jesus is very clear. He says, apart from me, you can do nothing. That's harsh, and we sat down with the organizers of the MLK prayer. So for any of you watching this now, go back in our New Wine Uncorked playlist and watch the interview, the dialogue with Pastors Lisa and Renee, and the heart behind it. And again, Phil, you said it, Tony, you said it. It's not to sit there and to tear apart Sean in the worship of Bethel. It's to call into accountability. I'm not one for accountability partners. I think that a husband who has to have a buddy hold him accountable for being nice and loving to his wife has some serious issues. I mean, when youth pastors tell their kids, hey, hold each other accountable, and if you need to be held accountable to love the Lord your God with all your heart, there's issues, right? However, we do need to be held in accountability with our playing out of faith, especially as Christian leaders. Okay. Just because you get a guitar and you're singing doesn't automatically mean that you're a leader because you have the microphone. However, there is a group of people looking at this Sean, looking at Bethel, that as leaders, they put out a crap ton of music. Okay. And look, I've wrestled with this the whole time because sometimes in prayer, you feel as if you're not doing as much compared to what we have identified as worship, as opposed to saying the whole holistic gathering is our worship, right? What does it mean to worship the Lord our God? So I think that we need to continue to press into it critically, but constructively. And I think that's the heart of New Wine, is it's not to condemn. I love the church, but I've been kicked out, literally kicked out leadership because, preaching on, hey, what if you took your vacation and instead of this year, and I live in a very the area that we're in right now is upper middle class. And so contending with people's vacation is like, those are fighting words. And when I suggested this year, because people here have multiple vacations, I said, you take one of your vacations, the amount of money that you're going to take for your family, and you then come to we have a local homeless shelter as well as food bank. You give that money not only to the food bank, but then you go serve during the time of your vacation. You stay here. That was like, I was like the spawn of Satan, because why? You're starting to mess with people's money. I've had this conversation with Metzger. I think that talk about racism is exceptionally important, and it's jarring. But my contention is that it's not as jarring as in is the conversation when you deal with people's money. you know Racism, I can say I'm pro-racism, and I was talking with my daughter about this. We could be pro-racism and not really do anything, just in word say we're pro-racism, right? I mean, pro anti-racism, not pro-racism. Jeez, Matt. uh, but we're pro against it, right? We're fighting against it just in word. We live, though, by our consumeristic tendencies. So say that I'm anti-consumeristic or anti-capitalistic in the sense of not wanting to consume one another. That's great, but my actions say so much more. Whereas if I'm anti-racist, it's easy to conceal those actions because you don't see that on a daily basis. What you see on a daily basis are consumeristic tendencies, our spending trends, right? So again, the church has to deal with this because we consume one another, but we then slap on the label of spirituality. And how do people know, though? Because the ones training up in the leaders of the church are training the people up of the church in a consumeristic mentality.
Yeah, and I think all of this, at least within the terms of the church and theology, is it's a discipleship problem. I think if we are discipling people, I think it's problematic when we say um, everybody can believe what they want to believe, and as long as they pursue unity. I think it's problematic when we say politics shouldn't separate people, because that's such an atomistic, individualistic um, conception and framework. Because when your politics actually affects and harms other people, we need to call that into account. We can't just slap on unity and say, and so, yeah, we can all say we're against racism, or we can say we're not racist, but it's something else to be anti-racist. And for some people, they may feel, oh, that's virtue signaling, or that's semantics, like there's too much behind that. But it's like, no, like we can't just be passive observers or passive participants. We have to actively work against the very thing that we want to condemn. So in the framework of racism, like, yeah, we can't just say we're not racist. We have to be anti-racist, and that's why it's a part of discipleship. If we disciple new believers or maturing believers to believe that they can believe whatever they want privately, as long as they're unified, or they don't cuss out their brother and sister in Christ, that is the mark of maturity for Christian uh, growth. I think that is a huge problem for the church. If we are saying you can believe whatever you want to believe privately, then I think that's a failure of the church in the way that we're raising up believers.
Yeah, and those are things that, I mean, we've lived into as the church for a long time, where we just, that's the root of the divisions, is the fact that, okay, I can go worship over there, you go worship over there, and we believe believe what we want to personally, but then, yeah, we both claim Jesus, so we're good with one another, and we not ever the two shall meet and actually talk about what's going on in their lives or bear one another's burdens and all those kind of things. This is just, yeah, the division within the church that exists it's been, it's really problematic, and it's just yeah, man, it's just weakened our witness so much. So when we talk about discipleship, we don't know another way. We just don't know another way, because it's so much built into how we do church that we can't really just stand up and say, hey, this is what Jesus would do. Let's follow him and then figure the rest out. Along the way, we got to have a strategy. We got to have a way this is going to benefit us in the end or benefit somebody in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, and discipleship is key because, and when we talk about discipleship, we have to also, I think, talk about the training up of the trainers, you know, the leaders who are training up and doing discipleship. And I think that's one of the things that's so, for me, that was so enticing and so uh, um, scandalous about New Wine is that it was so wanting to disciple those that are in the church now so as to then train up the leaders for tomorrow, but not in the ways of culture, not in the because consumerism, I believe, is what's led to the multitude of, as both of you are saying, we might gather on Sunday, put on a happy face and smile, but during the week is when we really are meeting with our niche groups, our homogenous small groups that we've all created based on some sort of likeness that whether it's ideology that we're all meeting and we all, tap each other on the back and say, oh gosh, look how great of Christians we are, but we're not contending with one another in those small groups because they're categories that we have created based on our consumeristic, our likeness, our trends, the things that we want. Not saying that the small groups, I mean, really, the church should be spread out in homes across the towns and the city in order to meet with our neighbors, but it's how we select those. Do we select them based on likeness of appearance? Do we do it based on likeness of ideology? Do we do it on likeness of economic status? There's some people who are lower economics that do not want to rub shoulders or ever be in the same room with someone who is rich because of a multitude of reasons, and vice versa. So how is it that we continue to categorize and separate? We really segregate the church within based on consumeristic tendencies, and we're not even thinking through the culture in which we're growing up in. you know and so pushing forward into this continued dialogue, this is what is so important, and why New Wine continues to seek out these dialogues, is because action minus the theology, the deeds minus the words behind them, the reasons behind them are empty actions. Then, if and vice versa, if you have words with no action, that's James and Paul's contention: faith without works and works without faith, right? So what's the step forward? We've talked about authenticity. We talked a little bit about the consumerism. What are the steps forward for the church? And this is what we want to go into. And next week, next episode, we're going to continue the dialogue to say, okay, so the church is in the midst of this. Schools are starting again. Okay, the classrooms are trying to contend with what is it to do? Teachers, safety. How is it that the church is going to be that beacon of light? So again, going back to the Sermon on the Mount, and we'll bring this up in our next episode, the church is called to be the salt and light. Okay, what is the saltiness of the church that is meant to be sprinkled on culture today? And is that saltiness being sprinkled so as to then be the profound light? And the light of what? It's easy. It's great to say the light of Jesus Christ, the love of Jesus, the way, the truth, the life of Jesus. What exactly does that look like when we're talking about in the past of authenticity? We've talked about the consumerism. We've talked about these contentions, these multiple factions of Christians, contending with each other, whether it's a prayer group on MLK or a worship group on MLK. How is it that there's not the unity that Tony spoke of early? So next week, be sure to join us again for our New Wine Uncorked. Uh, if you have not subscribed, go right down there next to Tony. Right now, you'll see the button coming up here. On one side of him is the video for you to watch, which hooks you up with the former videos, like I just said, that we just got a chance to sit down with pastors Lisa and Renee talking about the 24/7 prayer thing on MLK. Dr. Metzger has been able to talk about this aspect of, well, what are the theories, the conspiracy theories, the things that are going into the church today with New Wine tastings. And then New Wine Table Talks on Thursdays goes live for you to even interact. So Thursdays at 3 p.m. Pacific time, join us on Facebook for New Wine Table Talks Live, where you can then interact with us via the comment section. So again, for Phil and for Tony, I'm Matt Farlow. This has been another episode of New Wine Uncorked, where we're seeking this step into culture so as to truly be the authentic, God-called church that we are called to be as Christians. So until next time, we totally appreciate and stoked that you joined us again on New Wine Uncorked. We'll see you on the flip side.